All right, so my name is Zack. I am an organizer with UMAW, United Musicians and Allied Workers. We are an organization that does organizing and advocacy for artists. Came together sort of during COVID, trying to get some funding going towards artists as everything shut down. And since then, we have continued to grow and come together and sort of point our power at various places. So that can look like the Justice at Spotify campaign, trying to pressure Spotify and DSPs to give more money to the just deserved artists rather than hoarding it for Daniel Ek. That can look like the South by Southwest Fair Pay campaign, pressuring South by Southwest to raise the fees that they're giving artists, which they haven't raised in like 15 years. And that can also look like things like this, where we come together and talk about what we feel is important as a community of artists and build space and share. And I think it's grounding to build community with people who are doing the thing that you're doing. And something that has meant a lot to me as I've engaged with UMAW is finding that community, and finding that community not just in like sharing space, but as in sharing fight, and realizing that not until the working class artists and working class musicians and working class in general can come together and unify our voice can we sort of enact and build the change that we want to change. And that is the sort of like central and driving point and force of UMAW. And I really do encourage you all to become a member. We are 100% member-driven, member-funded. And the more the merrier. The more coming in and joining the voice and being able to add your power and grow this community is really the only way that we can win what we want. And that is like getting South by Southwest to ban defense contractors, writing legislation to create a new royalty for streaming. I mean, there are real things that we can accomplish, but only if you join us. I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists and then dive into what I'm imagining is going to be a really beautiful conversation. Taylor Weng is a creative singer-songwriter and audio and engineer who works as a radio editor at FYI.ai from Baltimore, Maryland. Her background extends into mental health care advocacy and companionship as she continues bridging the gaps between the creative world and the mental health world. Deaf Sound, pronouns they, them, is a Black Afro-Caribbean conceptual word artist born and based in South Central LA. Def is a post-binary contemporary hip-hop artist, producer, poet, educator, and award-winning academic. Def is Grammy-nominated for their work as a producer on Aja Monet's debut album, When the Poems Do What They Do. Beth Pickens is an art consultant with a background in counseling psychology, author of books Make Your Art No Matter What, and Art Will Save Your Life. Jonny Kosmo is an artist and psychologist and is the founder of our beautiful home here at Scribble. I also want to give a shout out to Scribble, who's opened their doors to us and has become really a central part of the LA music scene, and is just doing really good work that I'm sure we'll get into throughout this night. To start, I guess I'll just want to hear from each of you, but like, how are y'all doing? Like what, we're all trying to live and maybe make art and engage in a practice. So yeah, how y'all holding up?
Am I first? It's a pretty daunting first question, I'll say. Yeah, I think I'm doing okay. I actually feel very excited and connected already in this space with everybody. So that's a really good change, I think, from the week. And, been a lot of chaos and a lot of things going on. So it feels nice to come in here and get a little grounded with everybody. And yeah, I'm feeling good. How are you feeling?
Thank you for personalizing that. I think it's a feeling of, I feel like we can't hide behind anything anymore. I feel like the feeling is veil is lifted. What are we gonna do? And I also feel very much like personal victories in the midst of collective chaos, I guess. That's where I'm at with it. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I don't know what's going on with you guys. No, I'm just kidding. I've been mostly numb for the first few days. Were just kind of like numb, and I was like, oh, I feel really flat. And I notice I'm just trying to do whatever I can one day at a time to sort of maintain rising anxiety, because it's not just like individually or even community. It's sort of like off the charts anxiety of everybody you interact with everywhere, and that's a lot. And that you can't really tolerate that for years at a time. So I'm thinking about like what are just strategies for. I don't look at the news currently. That's what I'm doing. That's the thing I'm doing, is as little internet as I can do when I'm not working, and that's helping.
That question is so complex for me, and I think, how am I doing? I think I'm okay. I'm not okay. I'm hopeful. I'm also in despair and angry. I'm excited. I'm tired. And I'm fired the fuck up. I think I'm holding on. I'm trying to hold on to the complexity of all those things at once, which has been just some personal work that I've tried to be engaged in. But yeah, I have at the bottom of it in my heart, I have a lot of hope, and I'm trying to really tap that well.
Yeah, I think complex is probably where most people I know are at. And as we take this complexity and we fold it into our creative practice, what are tools or what vehicles do you use to either center that complexity in your practice, or maybe try to push it aside and know that it'll bubble up, or try to go in a different direction as you work on the things that you work on and write songs or sing songs or tour?
Yeah, I think Beth kind of had a little good segue into this in terms of not watching the news or being off the internet as much as possible. I think trying to get rid of as many outside energies that are just really not part of your everyday reality is incredibly helpful. And so I think, off the bat, that's immediately what came to my head. What about you guys?
Okay. Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, how do you hold your complexity with your creative practice?
Yeah, my creative practice is complexity. It is, I lean into it. I lean into because, I'm a poet, I'm an artist, I'm an MC, I'm an educator. So the idea is that I'm supposed to wrestle with the questions. I'm supposed to be living a dialectical life where you reach a certain point and then you have to question that point. So it's I'm always entangled, and I think when you ask about practical tools, something that I do, and I do this with my students as well, is I start with a journal prompt. Every class, I'm like, we start the way we start every week. You know what we about to do. Get them notebooks out. So I ask a question. They don't have to engage with the question, but usually I ask pretty engaging questions. And I give them about 10 minutes with that, So that also helps if people are late, they haven't missed anything, et cetera. But more like you need time to reset. The outside world is asking a lot of you. Your attention is quite divided. So how can we find the generative questions that allow us to move differently, because I don't believe that we are all here witnessing the world as it is to just let it wash over you. I think you're alive to do something different than how you entered the game. Now you know what's going on. You know what this country's about. So you don't have this consciousness for no reason. You don't have this consciousness to lay down about it. You do need rest. I do agree with that. But I think that the tool that I want to invite us to is engage with yourself first thing in the morning on the page. See what you think before the world tells you who you need to be. So yeah.
So I counsel artists all day. That's what my job is. And kind of a foundational underpinning of my work with artists is that an artist's creative practice is an essential way that they take care of themselves, no matter what's happening in the world. And that having an ongoing, ever-strengthening relationship to a practice is something an artist has to have for their entire life. And that's what makes artists different than me and the rest of the world. Like, everybody benefits from creative exploration, but what I've found professionally is that artists are people who need it to have a fully realized life. And so protecting a relationship to a practice, one's relationship to oneself, and then deciding what do I put out into the world and how do I want to engage with the world is crucial. I find that when artists have any kind of separation from their creative practice, their life quality deteriorates. So a grounding thing that I'm doing with all artists, no matter what's happening politically, and I imagine the next 6 to 8 months are going to be mimic 2017 a lot with the artists that I work with. And in the aftermath of the 2016 election, what I heard from artists a lot was, I have to stop making art, or this isn't important anymore, I have to go to law school, or whatever things that they were saying, that this isn't enough or meaningful. And my plea to artists was that you have to do this to have a fully realized life. You have to do this to take care of yourself. And then you have choices about how you engage the world with your work. But that this is a sanctuary and a balm, and it has to be protected. So I don't know if that engages the question, but that's just what's on my mind. Because as I'm talking to artists just in the past week, I don't have enough time to really have any data about how people are reacting this time, or what's going on with artists in different disciplines. I need more time for that. But the sort of panic that happened after the 2016 election led a lot of artists to think that somehow their practice had to take a back seat or be diminished. And I think for all artists, your practice is going to be a key way you take care of yourself, no matter what's happening, but definitely in the season to come.
Thank you for that. And I'm really sitting with everyone's words and feeling really inspired. I think something that comes to mind for me is, how do we reconnect to our values in a culture that wants to impose values as to what an artist should or should not be? And I think for me that's so important, not only for my own practice, but with my work with others, is bringing some deconstructive practices as to what is our culture telling us that the artist should be, and what is it that more correlates to what our sensibilities in a felt sense that should be. And something that I think correlates to this, which I try to engage with and I encourage others that I work with to engage with, is that so much of the agenda of late capitalism has been to brand ourselves, and that that works. For example, if you work for Town Pizza or something like that, and Town Pizza doesn't work out and it closes and you get laid off, you don't feel like you were a failure, right? You don't feel like you were a failure, right? But what happens is in this time and day, now that we're encouraged and almost have to brand ourselves in so many different ways, it's like if it doesn't work out for us, then that's a whole different feeling and conversation, right? Like, what is that? I often get met with, like, what does that mean about me? What does that mean about my art? And so for me, I think there's a piece of this that is important to artistic practice in terms of mental health, is helping to unplug from that branding that is just intrinsic and in the water we drink these days. And I see it a lot I'm not exempt from this, I see it a lot within myself, I see it a lot within others, and how that contributes to a sense of having to be a product versus having to be a human being. I see artistry as a way of living and being, to echo what you're saying, versus something that we produce. And so that's really important to me in my own practice, yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of conversations I have with folks in UMAW or interested in the work we do, that often comes up, where the limiting factor of reducing what we do to an exchange as not the reason why we do this, right? So we don't make music because we wanted to make a bunch of money. We do it because we have to. We do it because our complexity impels us to. And yet we are living with a real and daily material reality that engaging with art is difficult, and being an artist is difficult, not because it's existentially difficult, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but difficult because there's rent, and people don't like to pay for art, and corporations hoard all the money, right? That's difficult, aside from this whole generative discussion. So I wanted to sort of follow up the more maybe philosophical question with a much more grounded question to all of you of how does your, and Beth, we were talking about this a little bit before, but how does your material reality define or impact your creative process? And I'll say specifically from the vantage point of mental health, how does it impact how we are existing as artists and interacting with craft and process?
I was actually talking to a friend the other day, and he's an artist. He's a painter, and he was telling me, he was reminiscing about being a child and how much he enjoyed the act of painting and the act of drawing and the act of creating. And now he was saying, now I'm really just concerned about finishing and what it looks like at the end. And, even that distinction, you're placing value in different spaces now. And that must be coming from, the environment that we're coming up in, right? And I think something that else has kind of come up is this external world in general, whether it's politics, whether it's just life in general. And I think that always just calls in for, significance of time with yourself, of really getting to know yourself. And what does that look like? Because then you go into what does it look like to be an artist? And what does it look like to be branded? And how do I navigate that? And how do I stay rooted in what I believe in and go out into the capitalistic world, right? Because this is what I'm entering. If I'm an artist, if I'm deciding to be in the music business, it's not just music. There's a business. So how do I root myself in what I know and my values and my ethics and what I stand for? And how do I transmute that into this capitalistic world that I can make work for myself? And I think that really always starts with getting to know yourself incredibly deeply. I think part of this business is a lot of exploitation. There's a lot of power plays. There's a lot of middlemen who know a little bit more than you and can take a little bit more than you, and then you have nothing at the end. And because of that, you get so frazzled and so disoriented, and now you don't know where you are or what you want to do or where you want to go or how to get there. And I think it always comes back to being able to really look in the mirror and be like, no, this was my decision, and I'm very sure about that. And I think that will continue when you step out of that and into this external world. And I think holding on to that is incredibly important. Thoughts?
Thank you for that. Beautiful. I think so there's like kind of two questions that are in the air. One is about values and resetting our values. And then there's material conditions. Ooh, juxtaposition. So first of all, you have to be realistic about what are your material conditions? And that is my vocabulary word, like material conditions. Because I will say that is why the Democrats lost. They did not address material conditions, straight up. Straight up. You can't appeal to the people if you don't know what they need, if you're in denial about what they need. Our needs are the rent's too damn high, the money too damn low. So how do we meet here? And the reality is that the taxes are being used to fund a genocide. That's why things cost too much. That's why it's free Palestine. That's why it's free Congo. That's why it's free Sudan. Let's get straight to the root. The material conditions are unlivable. Name it, say it. Music is a part of propaganda. We have to propagandize our reality. That's what hip hop has been about the whole time, is naming the conditions, then saying this is unacceptable. But instead, this has become individualized and not seen as a collective struggle. We are all struggling, and we have to unite in class struggle, which is what UMAW is about, is to say the only thing we have, we are all we got, first. Second, withholding our labor, it's the only thing we can actually leverage. That's it. That will change your material conditions. General strike. I was hoping COVID would do that. We had a moment. I'm just saying, we had a moment, then it was like, oh, I want to be in the club so bad. You lost the plot, but it's okay. This is where we are now. So now to get back to values, I think we don't all have to agree on everything, but we all do need to figure out the move. You don't have to be my friend, but don't go to work and I'll cook you some food. Don't go to work, and we gotta tap in with our landlords. I'm not gonna fuck with you, I'm serious. Tap in with the landlords and be like, dog, come on now. Come on now, it's kind of tough for you too. But saying all that to say, getting back to values, where I will leave off is to say that there is beauty in obscurity. As an artist who has never had a record deal, I've been putting out my own music for 15 years. And it's taught me a lot. It's given me a lot of formulas. I've worked as a creative director for other artists who do have label support, and I see what the ins and outs are. I understand that it is a business. I understand that I've been self-funded this whole time. And what I get is that you've never met an artist with a record deal that is happy in their deal. I've been doing this for a minute, and I know that for a fact. So to understand that the failures have also saved you, it's also beautiful to never have had a deal. I've been free this whole time. Crazy. So that's beautiful. So now my value has never been placed in $1. My value has never, and we just got to tap in with where we are in our journey and be like, look, maybe I never had that thing, but you know what? Nobody could buy me either. So we can really get active. It's really possible. And I am hopeful in this moment that also people understand that this structure has never been to their benefit. We have to get on the same page about that and understand, you know, how this place has happened, was founded on genocide, and it has benefited a lot of white folks. So now you have to divest from it because it's not working out for you either. We have to unite in class and understand that all we have is our labor. That's where I will leave off.
Yeah. I think it's so crucial to where we're at. It's coming together as a class and saying no, fuck this. And to the two people, therapists who, you know, I don't want to cross a line, but how central is material conditions for the artists that you speak to? How, you know, working with artists and musicians, how often is it material concerns that you're hearing as the sort of something in the fore of what they're thinking about, aside or in conjunction with their more connection with their like art?
It's primary. Artists live in cities so they can have access to opportunity, and big creative community, and cities have become unlivable. I think artists are a really specific, interesting career counseling conundrum because you're the only workers who have jobs so that you can make your work. And so you end up working more than other workers, and your work and your working life is often not legible. I know you know this already. Like your life is not legible to people around you who are not artists. It can be very difficult to explain. And it's also a kind of work, the artist's work, it's not something you have a choice about. Like I mentioned, you have to do this thing in order to have your fully realized life. So it's not an option. And then doing this in disaster capitalism or late capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, that system is crazy, and it makes the people in it feel crazy and personalize it like there's something wrong with me, when it's just the structural issues around us. And I have what I sort of think of as the artist quadratic formula, which is like having my life in practice plus making a living equals what the fuck. And that's an equation we're solving and resolving over and over and over. And it's, in my experience with artists, I've been doing this consultation for 15 years. I haven't, there's nobody just kind of finds a thing, sets it, and goes. We have to keep sort of resolving it over and over as they change, as the world around them changes, as the practice changes, as the economy changes. But yeah, like the number one thing my clients need is time, and we have to have money to buy time. And there's wage gaps in every sector, including the arts, gender and race-based wage gaps. And because we live in a culture that has secrecy around money and lack of transparency, it just benefits the ruling class. So, I'm really encouraged over the past 10 years of the growth and outpouring of more transparency about money in organizations like Wage, Working Artists for the Greater Economy, that sort of calls for a unifying system to paying artists and making it transparent. Because the further complicating thing for artists is, so you have all these jobs, you can make your work, and then the making of the work, maybe it's paid, maybe it's not. There's certainly no clarity. People are very vague. People are predatory. Artists work the hardest to get paid. I mean, like chasing down invoices, chasing down $100 they were offered, taking 6 months to get paid for a gig, things that like your dentist would never accept, right? And so all of these combine to make like a group of people feel really exhausted and come to me over and over with the existential question of like, I don't know how to do this, but I can't not do it. So that's what I say, this is like an equation we're solving over and over and over again.
I'm just so inspired by everyone on stage right now, to be honest. I think the one thing I might piggyback on is this idea that I think that there's both an issue, and I know this maybe is just not the place to kind of unpack this, but there's equally a problem with like the mental health and psychology structural systems in place. that have turned problems into internal issues versus systemic ones. And that's something that I am told as like a deep value in the counseling center here and at the therapist I train, is that this is a common thing, like artists coming in and saying, you know, I don't know what's going on. I meditate, I exercise, I do my artist's way. You know, I'm eating healthy, I'm having, you know, there's something wrong with me. You know, I'm not feeling, I can't get it. And my response to that is always like, well, this is my response, but I ask a lot of questions around like, how did you come to know that this is an issue with you versus the systems in place that are creating this for you? And that is, I mean, that just to me is, when I think about the questions, even around like, what do you do for self-care? Or what are these things? All these things, you know, self-care, self-confidence, self-efficacy, self. It's like, we can't self out of this. You know, we can't self out of this problem that we're in right now. And so for me, that's something that I'm like really thinking about, is like how individualism has recruited the artist path in such a way that it becomes a problem with the self. And so that's just something I've been thinking a lot about, and wondering about, is how to shift. I mean, I think I love the questions around like, how do we bring practices into helping people, you know, self-regulate, things like that. But I also wonder at the same time, and if that's like the wrong question to be asking a little bit, because I feel like the question is like, how do we have a crazy overhaul together in solidarity over the system at play? And I know they're intrinsically linked, but I just, to me, in my work with artists, I just noticed this, similar to what you're saying, this common thread of making oneself the problem. ADHD on the fucking rise. But yet we're faced at the grocery store with fucking hundreds of, you know, decisions on how to choose mustard. I mean, it's, to me, it's like, you know, I'm really curious about how the system is playing part of this. So that's all.
I'm curious, sort of pulling from that, and a few people have talked about the role of music. I think Beth mentioned the role of music for musicians, and that having be a very healing thing. Definition of the role of music as, whether you like it or not, propaganda. I think there's a lot of musicians who are wondering about sort of what they can do now, and you know, and also this is like a perennial question. You know, the genocide was going on before the election. Um, every year we're confronted with new ways that we're all being abused by the ruling class. Um, and taking that, and I often hear this thing of like music is healing, and I know this is something that you've thought about, and I feel like that might ring hollow for some people, though, just like, yeah, music will heal, like, you know, it's beautiful, like, do your thing. And for a lot of people, myself included, it's like why am I making a record right now? Like, why would I ever make a record? Um, and just to add one more thing to that, it's complicated by the fact that as artists, it takes some time to process before you create. And we're confronted, you know, everything folds into each other, but on social media with the immediacy of everything going on, and then we have to process to create. And I think that lack of immediate engagement for artists is really difficult. And I wonder how you all navigate that feeling personally, and then also what you feel that role of the creation should or could be.
think processing anything also is so individual in itself, and then when you put it in the role of an artist, like, so ridiculous. Go crazy. Which I think kind of stems back to trying to block off as much of other people's immediate reactions to things as well, because they also haven't processed these things. And that's really important to like understand, like what we're receiving is impulsive behavior for the most part, and like rage bait answers for the most part. And the way we receive that is really important. So I think in general, knowing when you're receiving too much of this outside, not only just outside, but impulsive energy, if you will, or immediate, like unprocessed thoughts and work on it. Because as artists, we just feel everything and intake everything. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're taking from other people and then it's ours all of a sudden. And that's really tough. And you're like, why am I anxious? You know, we were just around 10 people who, you know, whatever. So I think that there is not only beauty in processing, but so much significance in it and importance to sustaining your well-being as a human, but really much so as artists. I'm not sure if I was really answering your question. I just started talking about the processing.
Yeah, I think talking about how you process what you see now and just continually is exactly it. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think you had mentioned journaling at the start of your day. That's also in the artist way. It's like the first page or something like that. But I think that stream of consciousness is so helpful. It's like a detox. It's a release of everything that you're carrying over. I'm a big journal advocate in general. I think releasing that in some way is so important. I think it really does sit with you. Your body does keep score. It will show up in one way or another. So I shouldn't scroll for an hour. I love a good doom scroll. I'll be there forever. You see me, I'm active all the time, avoiding, not processing, I should say. But yeah, I think even just being aware of the fact that immediate response, immediate emotions are without the process, and perspective is so important, and that comes with processing. What you receive is so important, and making room for the process to receive the correct energy, I think, is really significant here.
Sure. I think another part of the question too was like when we feel that defeat of like, damn, the conditions haven't changed. And you know, what do I do as an artist? Like what is a poem really going to do right now? And I wanna just like behoove us. I want to encourage us to have the courage to tell the truth. I think that's what we're here to do, is to tell the truth about it. Your perspective is so valuable, and when archaeologists look at past times, they're looking at art when they go through the archive. That's portrait. You know, how else do we know what they was wearing back in the day? Was it no photographs? There was also poems. There was writings. These things are important, and if we don't tell the truth about it, there are people who are here to erase that. That is their whole job, is to legislate an erasure. And that's why they burn the books. You know, that's very important. So I think that your role is actually really vital, bro. Get it together. Or tell us the truth about how you don't have it together. I also think that I was speaking with a friend about mental health, and I was like, I don't know what to say over here. It's a tough time, but thinking about therapy, thinking about the necessity of that, I think there is a romanticization that music, especially I will speak from Black male socialization, that music is my therapy. And no way. Um, I really don't advocate for that. Because I think one of my friends, Akiko, said that art is not substitute for policy. That is really important. And I think that I want to say on a personal note, I only had access to therapy once in my life, like where I was able to be paid for it and everything. And that was because I was an artist, not because I had the money, not because of anything else, but I had access to therapy, which is not, art is not the substitute for that. Is to say that, we all need people to speak to. And we need it. And when we talk about truth telling, I think we have to look at it as a practice because most of our life is about denial here. So we have to practice telling the truth. It's not rewarded out here. So that is a practice. And I think when we acknowledge our material conditions, then we can actually give each other more grace out here. You give yourself grace, you can be like, damn, we are all going through it. So I think truth telling as a practice.
Can you see the question? Please.
Yeah, well, and maybe you have a particular insight into just because you speak with a multitude of creatives, but what do they or you see as the reason for creating amidst daily trauma, and what is the impact that our work can or shouldn't have? It should not maybe like replace therapy, but maybe it should be speaking truth to power or some sense of catharsis for someone.
I mean, people can't survive without art. Not just artists who make it, but we couldn't have a culture. We wouldn't have any functioning culture. And whether or not this is fair, we look to artists to facilitate feeling and to explain the ineffable. So all of art history, as you were gesturing at, is trying to explain death and the divine. And artists, I think, are the best possible people for doing that. Which is, if we get to the root of all fears we have as humans, we're afraid we're gonna die, and we are gonna die. And artists are the best possible opportunity to explain, interpret, reflect death and the divine. That's a really tall order for people who are also like struggling to live in expensive cities and all the crises of mental health of modernity. And so I do crazy things with my clients. Like I put them on social media moratoriums where they cannot be on social media for a month at a time to have like kind of a reset. It's very hard now to get bored, right? Like it's hard to get bored. And artists have to be able to sift through anxiety, levels of fear, returning to the internet over and over again to get down to like the subterranean stuff that is like, oh, that's what I want to say. It's down here. And it's difficult to traverse all that territory to get there. And we need quite a bit of quiet to get there. And quiet is also a difficult thing to have now. So besides like social media moratoriums, I really, we live in an attention economy. Our attention is a resource, and we get to restrict it. We get to decide what we give attention to. And so I'm not just here to like bash the internet nonstop, because I also know that for working musicians, like you don't have a choice of whether or not you're online. But refusing to give our attention to what doesn't feed us is really important. It's one of the tools and resources that we have. So you have to make your work because you need to live. And we need your work so that we will live. Like everybody here, all of the working artists here, you're making something that when it goes out into the world, if you choose to share it, is going to have a transformative impact on someone that you will never know about. For each person you hear about who's deeply affected by something you made, there's 100 people you never even know about, right? And you have a key role in humanity, reflecting like the best of what humans can do. I lost my train of thought, so I'm just
No, that's great. And just to connect that thought to something we talked about earlier, and this is the conversation I have often with musicians around organizing, where I ask them, maybe you don't feel like you're successful enough to want a wage, right? You don't feel like you've earned the wage because you decided to do music. And I'm like, sure, but like you can be a crappy car salesman and make a bunch of money. Why can't you be a crappy musician and like pay rent? Like success isn't tied to, and we talked about this at the very beginning, some abstract notion of being huge and wildly impactful. It's just mundane. It's just every day. And just by doing your thing, you should be able to live. That's like, it's very straightforward. And I think connecting it to other modes of work, whether it's working at a coffee shop, like you don't have to be like world champion barista to earn your minimum wage. You just gotta make coffee. Like why can't you just like make music and then have your needs met? And I'll say you can if we all work this together. But
I just want to add one thing that your question made me think about, which is a value that I hold as a human being, but also as a therapist, which is that there are no small acts of resistance. And it makes me think about that because I think that sometimes there's, from my work, that there's kind of this underlying thing of shame that because I am making art or releasing a record at this time that I shouldn't be doing that right now, or that to have fun right now is not okay. And I just like really lean into the idea that having fun is actually an act of resistance in the world we're living in today. By having this conversation here today, I have to believe that we're taking a step in a direction. And so for me, I'm just really interested in about how art plays a part in acts of resistance in a culture that also wants us to shame ourselves, to put ourselves down. And so it just made me think about that. And the other thing I want to say about just kind of like social media is a lot of my work in the room with clients is like in real time. We'll go through Instagram feeds. I'll go through them with my clients and deconstruct some of the stories that they're taking away from what they're seeing and helping them to expose them, externalize them, and talk about what is the story they're telling themselves based on the image they're seeing, and really pulling apart some of that systemic stuff that exists within the social media culture, which has been really great work. And so I just wanted to put that out there as well.
I think also to kind of jump on that, you were talking about, the resistance and, being an artist in general can be seen as a form of resistance, in the first place. And then you were talking about, your truth telling and key roles and kind of describing the divine and death and beautiful, huge orders like that. And I think, hearing it as an artist, I almost started to get overwhelmed. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. That is a lot of stuff. And I remember, those moments where I'm like, God, nobody wants to listen to me. Like, nobody cares about what I have to say. Like, I'm just a random human. What's the point? And something that I always kind of come back to is that before I understood the world, before I understood capitalism, before I understood war crimes and all these really daunting, insane things that are going on all the time for me and will continue after me, before all of that, I was still singing and writing and dancing and having a beautiful life within that. And I think that is what makes it, a resistant thing. That what you're actually trying to do is exist in this capitalistic corporate world as that, as a singer. What are you talking about? We have work to do. We have things to build. Like, we have money to make. What are you talking about? You want to sing? That in itself is an act of resistance. And so I think even just being rooted in that it just comes naturally. That was gifted to you in whatever capacity that comes out. But, truth telling, speaking of the divine, speaking life in ways that we can't understand, that is a natural part of you as an artist. And I think, kind of remembering that and being grounded in that is also very helpful with the process, because it is a tall order to be an artist. But the beautiful part of it is that that was gifted to you. It's not as hard as it sounds almost, because you existing in that is how you do that. And that's a really grounding thing as well in terms of the process and everything like that.
I want to say, like, specifically to you, that there is the ability for reciprocity in your specificity. That whenever we feel down about whatever, there is the ability for resonance. And I think that's why we share what we do, is to resonate. And when we get really specific about it, I know truth sounds hard to get at, especially when we've been like masking in this world to survive. But I think that there is the ability to have reciprocity with others, which is why we share the gift and we don't keep it just in the room. We share it with the world because now we can connect. Now we can drop all that stuff. And when you get, I look at truth as a specificity. That's what
I love that. Tanner, what you said really resonates with me. About the, when you're a kid, you feel created, right? And I've thought about this a lot, and maybe it's because I am an artist and also an organizer, but you know, what is the end point of the work that you must do? What is the end point of building worker power? It's for all of us to get to the sandbox, right? It's for us to talk about have time that artists talk about needing. That's the end point, right? You can garden, you can play with your kid, you can write a song. You know, that's post-revolution. When we can all have that time and that freedom from scarcity, where we can pursue that. I also wanted to ask, this is something that came up in some of the RSVP questions, sort of like particular connection between mental health and artists around maybe a cultural enjoyment of seeing artists in pain, whether that's addiction or just sleeping on a couch on tour, and how that connects maybe with our choice to not be a banker or something that is concrete, connected to wage. I'm wondering if people have responses to that or feel that in their own lives.
I'm interested about you working on this on the other side. Big thanks.
You mean sort of like the fetishization of suffering?
Yeah.
In my experience, I think that's a larger cultural trope than in the lives of my clients, the artists I work with. The artists I work with seem to really understand that the more they are well, the more work they'll make, you know? And the better the art gets, that suffering doesn't produce art, that's sort of like some myth in the larger culture that they're just like, well, that's just not true. Every once in a while, I'll encounter an artist who wonders if I don't have this addiction, will my art be good anymore? Or if I don't have this like thing that I know is hurting me, like will it somehow change the art? And we just talk about like the more well you are, just the more art you make, and the deeper you can go. Yeah, I don't find, and the fetishization is definitely a cultural trope, right? Like, but I don't experience that in the lived life, the daily lives of the client that I work with. Like they don't believe that. You don't believe it?
I was gonna say something that's interesting that you kind of just said is like, will my art still be good without my addiction or without my? I think even just as someone who struggles with mental illness at all, like there is a part where you feel that way about getting better in general. Like you're like, well, what am I if I'm not walking around with this gray cloud over my head all the time? Like, what does that look like? I'm not sure. And so it translates equally so into the art and into music. And I think we see it on in really big ways, like Chance the Rapper, my guy, love him. love him real bad. And after Coloring Book, the way that his music was received and the way that it's dismissed and invalidated, and then that is tied directly to the fact that he doesn't do acid anymore. Like whether it's a joke, whether it's a tweet, like that's the correlation. Like nobody has, no, I don't say anything else. Even if it's just silly discourse, that's not very silly, like with who's receiving that. Whether it's a smaller artist trying to stop taking acid, it's like, well, wait, what if I can't do it anymore? So I think in that sense, like it's incredibly harmful. And then you have the other side of like who's on the receiving end, because we also have a lot of these huge artists cosplaying the struggle, right, and pretending to be one of us all the time. And so that also being on the receiving end, being young, listening to, I remember when Nicki Minaj was like, Future hasn't drank lean in years. Like nobody knows that. And everybody was like, what is she talking about? Is this real? Like it legitimately affects the youth. Very incredibly so. To a scary degree, but it does. And so, you know, I think I mean, there's glorification of it in media. I mean, Euphoria was all the rave, and it was also all the controversy because of that. And you know, I think we see it all the time, whether it's cultural or you know, I definitely see it culturally a lot. But I think in general, with mental health, I struggle with that individually. Of like, who am I without this extra thing? Who am I without anxiety? Who am I without my depression and my struggles and all that stuff? So I definitely see it, you know, translating. And then once you monetize something like painting, it's a very tricky space to navigate after that. Here's all this money because of how awful you're doing. Keep it up. What am I supposed to do with that? That's a pretty tough space also. And then you can get into exploitation, right? Of the person in power understanding that this is how you're making all this money. How do I keep you here? That's also a very real space. And maybe not for every single individual artist, but I do think that the harm spreads very wide.
Feel that. And I think as Black artists, our trauma is always perceived. I think it's something that there is a consumption issue, but I also think that it's our duty, as long as we're alive and we have this ability, to fuck around and find out, heal, collectively, tell the truth. I think when we saw Mr. Morale, right, when the Kendrick record came out, there was a hunger for something else. There was a confrontation with the culture. And I think directly, just to get into it, directly, there's a correlation between the beef and the release of Mr. Morale. When Mr. Morale came out, I said, that's an invitation. That record is an invitation for us all to really get into it. Tell the real truth. Go in on it. This is how that can sound, right? So, an example, an artist that big at that time in his life, Damn was great. He had just won a Pulitzer Prize. Now I'm going to tell you about how my mom was hurt by abuse and how that affected me and how we need to heal. There's a line on the song, Mr. Morale. Hi, Drake. It's time to heal. Drink some water. Like, that's what I mean. It's propaganda to get us to get out of here. We have to make the music. We have to make the spells to heal ourselves for real. So the beef, what I took big issue with, the beef between Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole. Even though he tried to bow out, he still said something. You remember, might delete later. But the thing that I had a big issue with was that both of those artists that went at Kendrick directly dissed that album with the cultural problem. I didn't like that. I took that personally. I said, no, don't diss the album. You can talk about Kendrick, but you can't diss that album because that album was an invitation, which you guys did not take, which is why you're going to take this album. So that's how it happened. Keep going down the line.
You have an artist like Tyler, who is the only artist that I've seen on a mainstream level to take the invitation. Listen to that Chromacopia album. He took the invitation to tell the truth. Look at it, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And that's on a mass level. I'm just saying that our trauma is always for sale, but also there's healing in the truth telling of it. Now we just have to understand who it's for. And when we're making art in the dark, which is a lot of the time that we're making art is not visible to anyone else, we have to train ourselves to make things, whether there's a light or not, whether anyone is looking, whether anyone cares, whether anyone likes your post. You gotta do this thing. And it's a beautiful gift. And yeah, I'm just happy to the artists who have shown us how to do it. Beautiful.
Thank you. I love that. There's so much eye contact in this, because I feel like I really need to hear as an artist who wakes up every day being like, well, fuck. So just a aside, thank you, y'all, for preaching the word here. Going to something that's maybe very mundane, but Beth mentioned the one time you were able to access mental health is because you're an artist. Beth, you're a psychiatrist or a counselor.
I should play a psychiatrist on TV.
And Jonny, with Scribble, where can you go? Like, what door can we knock on to get help, or not even just to get help, just to talk, to get in the weeds with somebody to find our truth, or scream into the void at.
It's a really good question. Good question. I have a couple of thoughts. One is that therapy in our culture has somehow cost $200 a session now, which to me is really, really both unfortunate and makes me really upset. The other thing, like my goal, okay, so like I just want to say a few things. I'm sitting here just feeling like I am on this stage, and this idea of like being the founder and all these things. I just want to like acknowledge that like I feel as though this place really like found us versus like me founding anything here, because I think there's such a big need for mental health services that are one, affordable, and two, understand subcultural ideas. So much of my education was not around like how subculture plays a part in people's like well-being and mental health. And my goal for this place or this organization, I should say, is like really like what disturbs me even more is that artists on labels don't receive any health care whatsoever, and they're expected to be on the road constantly. And also, like the people who work there, who are sitting behind computers, get health insurance. I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying, what the fuck? So, like, one of my goals and hopes for this organization is I would really like to reach out to record labels and offer them the idea that maybe they donate a certain amount of money to this organization a year that entitles all their roster to have mental health services with us. That's something that's like a huge goal of mine here. I will say, I have not been met in the best ways by that in reaching out to places thus far. But I'm still going to be persistent about it. I just want to tack back onto this idea of individual care versus community care and group care. So much again of my training as a therapist has been like around like the idea that group therapy or anything that's like other than individual is like adjunct to individual therapy, which to me is also not only speaks to like this individualized culture around like healing, but that's something that we're really trying to address here is that like group work, community healing is something that I see as so important right now. And so that's something that I'm like a huge advocate for is like how to invite more group types of conversations, group types of feeling versus this idea that like each person's gonna go into this place and do their healing thing and then come back out into the world. I'm really interested in like collectivism type of healing. That's not a new fucking idea. You know, it's like that's not a new idea. I mean, all everything I'm saying is tapping into way, you know, things that have worked so much in the past and still continue to work for other cultural contexts. So that's what I'm really interested in right now. Yeah.
As we sort of get to maybe the close of the first part of the conversation, get to some questions from folks who are watching online and from people in the room. I want to sort of build off that. And I think throughout this conversation, all of us have mentioned community at some point. So I'm curious how people find and cultivate their community and what that means to them. And I'll say, for my own part, organizing is a lot like group work. There's something deeply powerful about getting together with your coworker and withholding our labor or commanding the AC is turned on at your coffee shop because they're too cheap to turn it on. And that is real, concrete, powerful community. And I urge everybody to engage in your workplace, with your tenants in your apartment building, with your community, and do organizing. Speak to neighbors, find out what they're thinking about, what they're trying to accomplish, what would make their life better. Most of the time, you'll find will make your life better. And doing that work is really, really beautiful. And I think is crucial to being human. So that's my answer to how you find and cultivate community. I'm curious what other folks here.
Yeah, I think community, like you were saying, is incredibly important, especially to an artist. I feel like in general, we live in isolation for long periods of time. So community is definitely important. I think I was also thinking about this, a creative community as well as not creative. That's not the right way to say it, but you know, your creative artistic community, you kind of have the capacity to be creative, but that's not the point. Anyways, and then other people who you can share other interests with, because I also think collectively, a bunch of artists is also still a lot of energy and a lot of energies and feelings and emotions. And it is nice to be with someone who is outside of that and can kind of ground you in other perspectives and other realities as well. So I do think that's also really important. I am fortunate enough to work at a space that I've been able to cultivate kind of a community in that way. And whether it's my coworkers or you know, actual community members that we interact with. And they have, you know, created such a safe space for me, especially I've only been here a little bit over a year. So to have people who are very solid and by your side and just allow you to show up however you need to show up that way is incredibly impactful for me as an artist, as just an employee in general, but especially as an artist. I think I have found so many like once a month free yoga or once a month sound baths and things like that. And those also create community. And I think it's hard because a lot of times you go out by yourself. Like a lot of times you start alone within those spaces, and that can be really scary and really daunting. But nobody cares. Nobody's looking at you. It's fine. Just go anyway and smile and say hi, and you're gonna be fine. And that has also been really great. Just kind of expanding my side quest is what I call it. And I do random like hiking groups that I find on Instagram. And I just am constantly trying to stay with people who are happy and zestful about life and excited. And then I also enjoy spending time with people who create the space when life is not super zestful and super joyful, and you can be in that as well. So yeah, I definitely go out and seek it, for sure, and put myself in places that I think would be beneficial, and I call it being obedient to the universe. Wherever it tells me to go, I'm gonna show up, and that's worked out for me so far. So, recommend.
Great advice to be obedient to the universe. I think the ways that I've found community, and I've lived in LA my whole life, so put the context there. So I've seen a lot of different people come and go, and I think that the way that I've continued to find community, even as the city changes, is to you find community in the doing. When you're out doing the thing, because you understand what you care about. So when you understand, like communities of care, I care about poetry. So I just Googled poetry lounges in Los Angeles, poetry readings in Los Angeles. And this is about being obedient, right? So I did that. I went and I told myself, because a lot of my friend groups at that time was based on proximity. So where do I go to church? Where do I go to, school? Those kinds of things. But I needed to know that I cared about poetry. So first, identifying what do I care about? Care about poetry. I went. I stood in line and I gave myself a task. I said, you have to meet 3 people or else you won't come back. I know me. So stood in that line, I met 2 people. Like, oh yeah. Walk inside. I go in, sit down. The host is named Poetry with an I, because he started doing poems in the 90s. Shout out Poetry. He was on stage. He said, all right, who all is new here? I raised my hand. A bunch of people raised their hand. And then he says, all right, get up and meet 3 people you haven't met. This, I was like, whoa, obedient. Obedient. So I kept going. I kept going. I went and I just observed for 6 months. I didn't read poems. I was writing every day. But that's also to say, go to spaces and observe. It doesn't always have to be about you. You got to see what is the space giving? What does it need? How can I be of assistance? I read after 6 months. That's when I started reading. Then that first 6 months, I started slamming. Then I went to Austin, Texas. Our first poetry slam. That's where I meet Asha Monet. That's where everything happens when you're obedient. So I really, to piggyback what you're saying, is to really go with it, create games for yourself. Gamify, even just, I'll meet 3 people, or hey, I'm gonna go to this bar and I'm only gonna ask questions. I'm not gonna talk about myself, See what happens. I'm just saying, don't lead with, oh, I work at such and such. You know what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying is let it be an inquisitive experience.
I like the achievable goals too. Keeping yourself coming back. That's a good one.
So,
I've been in LA 10 years, and before that, I was in San Francisco. In both places, the first thing I did to find people was start volunteering. Just kind of find who was doing something that reflected like what I want, the kind of world I want to be in. And I started volunteering at those places. And that's sort of how I would get an entry into community. With the artists I work with, isolation and alienation are really pervasive for people, definitely with all the artists I work with. And so I will give them specific homework to take contrary actions when they know they're isolating or they suspect they might be. And so I'll ask them, you know, every month you have to go see out the world, any discipline, and you have to ask another artist to go with you. You just have to ask. Most people don't have it in them, the wherewithal to sort of like be the person who instigates plans. So I think, well, at least the artists I work with, they will be the people who instigate plans, who just ask, do you want to come with me? Do you want to do a thing? Let's do a thing. And be the people who sort of make the thing happen. And that has ripple effect. But I think how you find community is you go where it's warm and don't keep going to where there's nothing or where it's cold or unavailable. You go where it's warm. And you look around to see like who reflects like the life I want, the world I want to be in. Go be with them in whatever capacity is available.
I love it. I love it all. I was just thinking about how one thing that I think musicians might struggle with a bit is that there's a difference between community and networking. And that like sometimes like somehow the word community has got a little bit turned into networking a little bit. I see that like it's like I'll show up to your show, you show up to my show, and then you know like let's like and there's a difference between I think like again like I keep going back to like the capitalist agenda here to kind of keep climbing some sort of thing, but I really want to invite the idea that like there's a spirit element to community that I think is really important that gets a little bit twisted within the word as it applies to artistry as it comes to success, and that's something that I just wanted to acknowledge a bit. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that is, I think, a beautiful way where you're all going to be given some homework for yourselves to take over the next couple of weeks. So huge thank you to all of you for taking this time to chat. We do want to open up questions that was sent from the online, and if anyone in the room has questions, please.
Hi, Julia. I have a question. So I've been reading this book called The Death and Resurrection Show, and it's an anthropology book about shamanism and how music played a huge role in the way shamans healed in the hunter-gatherer societies. And it was just, and the audience or the tribe was also part of the healing process. So there was the person who was sick, the shaman, and then the audience or the person, like the tribe. And so they all work together to help this person heal. And the book talks about how entertainment kind of took those elements. So the shaman is the entertainer, and how different communities and different artists can create from that shaman space. So I don't know if you guys have read the book, but I just have a question. About that, about how the importance of healing in music, but also how shamanism might play a role in that as well, and being an artist, because the shaman was an artist, they were a healer, but they were also, they were creative as well. Zack, can you just repeat for the internet and posterity?
Yes. The question was, how does shamanism play a role in the modern music practice, both as the parallel of shaman to entertainer and community with tribe and listenership, and the potent potential healing power that might or might not have.
Yeah, I think that believe in belief, and I believe in the power of words. I believe that we are water, and water has a memory, and whatever you speak around it changes that water. We can look that up right now on YouTube. That water is really responsive to our words, to vibration. Because all it is, music is just wiggly air. So you're saying stuff out here and it's resonant. And the truer it is, the more resonance it holds. Which is why I also study comedians. Because you only laugh because it's funny. So we're with that, you know? So there's a beauty in the delivery of the message too. And I think that it's a practice. And when we practice getting at the root of something, then I think that there is these collective messages that the world doesn't know that they might want, but you got to put it out there and see what happens. And then there's the possibility of the resonance when you get into your specificity. And I think I do look at music as spells. I really do. I think that if you were to memorize some of these things, and I tried it, I think an album that is no longer on Spotify actually, that put this to the test was Yasin Bey's album called The Zack. You can find it on YouTube, but you can't find it on any of these other places. Um, and the words on there, that's the first time I ever heard a hip hop record that I said, if I could memorize this, I can change myself, actually. And I think that people really downplay hip hop because of the mechanisms that are in control of it, are not the people, unfortunately, but it has the most words of any genre. Why is that? And we just have to listen a little faster. Again.
There's a question that came in online. What are panel's thoughts about music venues, alcohol consumption, fitness space, and mental health?
I have a lot to say on this. I think that, yeah, I mean, I have never, I don't come from a background of running a venue at all. And I will say that once this space opened and we started hosting shows, I quickly realized that all venues are really just a way to sell alcohol. In reality, like they really like. I started reflecting a lot also on like what I've gotten paid, and I was just so upset. I was just so upset because well, the one thing is that like, this space for me in terms of like you know no small acts of resistance like this space is a resistance against the alcohol based industry that has taken over entertainment. Uh, and it is really hard. I have had several people read me out on the phone, cancel shows, promoters being like, how can you have a show without alcohol? How are we gonna sell tickets? Like I have come over the past year of this place being open, I've had so much pushback on it. And in terms of it relating to mental health, I'll tell you what, like there's a difference in seeing a show in a space that does not serve alcohol. Like a complete difference. Like what's that? Social dark. I mean, there's just like an intimacy that's built in, and I think that is also uncomfortable for people. And my answer to that is good. Like, good. Like let's connect. You know. So for me, I'm really. I think it also dovetails into kind of like the like suffering of like an artist and what has to happen. I mean, I might be a little biased. I am a person. I'm a sober person. I have a background where I was like for years. I shot heroin and daily and toured and all these things. As soon as I stopped doing that and started touring as a sober person, I quickly realized, like, I just want like a meal. Like, I don't want like drink tickets. What the fuck? Like, I just want like a bowl of chili. Like, you know, like some saltines at least. And so for me, I'm like really interested in also like the ways in which the alcohol industry does, it is impossible to remove that from the mental health side of things that are happening to touring people. I work with a lot of people, I know I have a lot of friends who they're not like alcoholics or anything, but when they're on the road, they're like, what else is there to do? I mean, like, it's a hurry up and wait game. Get to the venue at 3 o'clock for sound check and then sit around. And oh yeah, well we don't have we don't have any lasagna, but we got like a packed Bud Light in your freaking room. So for me it's like how do we actively kind of challenge like alcohol in this artist path? And I think there's definitely been movement in it, I wanna say. Like I think there's a lot of artists who have witnessed how the effects of substance use and alcohol use has killed people. We've lost a lot of people. We continue to lose a lot of people. And I think that there's a lot more musicians getting sober, I've noticed, which is a really great thing because they're realizing like if they want to continue to be a part of this spiritual practice for the rest of their lives, it's just not going to work out. You can't sit in the van all day drinking every night and expect to feel good, you know? So yeah, sorry, I just kind of.
You gotta be a clear channel for message to come through.
Yeah, true.
Really, just quick comment on what you're saying. I just want to kind of commend you for taking the space for creating sober spots. As somebody who's in marketing, I need to let you guys know. The trend is now is they're not drinking like they used to. I'm gonna let you know. They're not, and it's becoming a concern for the music specifically, animation and things like that, because kids, especially under 25, are they're coming in with ginger beer and that's all they want. So you might be at the forefront of something you need to pull. Yeah, very much. You want to go in and you just want like a case of like Costco waters, but they know, but we got like 2 things of whiskey. Get into it. Very much something that they're fighting right now. So also just something, and I need to remind everybody. Less than 20 years ago, I used to actually work for one of these tour companies, but the music industry used to be funded by tobacco. It used to be a lot of, if you were at a root show or a hip hop show or something, you saw a Newport, a Camel, or something around, and just like as smoking tobacco went away, the trend looks like it's going to be for that kids are actually very interesting. So, please take that as you will. If there's anybody who needs that, you're not the only one at the show who is like, you live screen and throw flowers at artists. It's getting back to that, you know. And I think that it's something that we all should think about. It's like just go to the show and not drink. It actually saves you a lot of money.
I think that's also becomes really clear when you look at local shows and the list of people who were paid before the artist and how the bartender. I'm not saying that the bartender should not be paid, but that's like without question, right? Of course, the bartenders pay minimum wage, but the artist is not, and I think that speaks to what the folks are saying that what's being sold at the venue is maybe not the music, but it is the drug or the alcohol. I think that it has very potent impact on how we think about our labor and what we do with that. Any more questions in the room?
I was gonna say something very funny, is that one thing I used to ask my manager to do was to ask them if they're trying to get us to play a free show or something weird like that, was how much are you paying security? Because who are they securing? Who's here to see it? So that was a funny question. Yeah.
Hi. I have a million thoughts, so I'm gonna look at my notes so I don't ramble. Kind of returning to, art as catharsis or processing, like when you do it for yourself, but then being selective about what you share out there. I know we talked about, suffering and art is suffering, and we're not going to sustain ourselves if that's what we stay in. But I know for me growing up, if I didn't journal, make poetry, music, art, performance art, I would not have survived my childhood. And now I'm revisiting these poems and bringing some in songs and bringing some of them to therapy, because that's the only way I can tap into like how terrible it was. Now I don't want to keep. I'm looking for feedback as I share this, in case you have insight where you might relate. As you decide what to make of some of the art that you do make when you're in pain. I don't feel right sharing it unless there is some kind of silver lining or coping tools, or I'm in school becoming a therapist, and I really want there to be like an accompanying journal guidebook or something where I'm not just trauma dumping on an audience. Or maybe there's a collective way for us to look at like how Kendrick Lamar talks about his story with his mom, right? Like it's not just him. There's a we of like look at what we go through sometimes because we're not well. We come from a lineage where we have to break cycles, or we get to break cycles, or we try to. So I guess I'm just on the one hand exhausted from revisiting these things and processing them, but in hopes that it'll transmute into something meaningful for people. And I'm just wondering how that sounds to you, and if you relate or have any tips on that, because I just want to be done with it and move on to something else. And then I almost feel like I'm always creating, but I have a hard time. You guys spoke to this earlier. Finishing, complete, because that takes a different type of discipline. And I'm a starter, but not always a finisher, and I'm busy. So, but this project with childhood trauma, channeling it into something kind of like collectively healing is so important to me, and yet so exhausting. So I'm just looking for some inspiration or feedback on how you might relate. Zack, can you repeat or summarize or repeat? Really good at that too.
Yeah. The question is, how do we take lived trauma and integrate it into our work? And what are the limits of healing if there isn't direct pathways or vehicles to dealing with that trauma? Is that?
Yeah, do you ever just kick it aside and say never mind, or do you find a way to make something of it? Where do you go with it?
Yeah, where do you go with your trauma in your work, and how is it beneficial to yourself and people?
Yes.
I think, I think in general, I commend you for doing the work. I can feel how much work that is when you speak about it. I think it's also very telling that there's something really calling you to share it. There's a doubt coming in, but I don't think that's like your intuition. I think the initial part of sharing it is what you're really being called for to do. And then there's this doubt thing happening, which is fine. But I think the doubt is also calling you to look at, or, now you're asking yourself, okay, why am I doubting this? And the answer is seeming to be you don't want to trauma dump. You don't want to cause more harm. And I think for you, honestly, it sounds like you know the answer. It sounds like you were called to do so, to share with the conclusion, if you will, of healing. Because some people might just be called just to share. This is where I'm at. This is all I got for you right now. I hope somehow I can be with you through pain as well. Sometimes that's what they're called to do. It sounds like you've been called to take another step with that. And that's a really cool calling. I know you're tired. Maybe you can sleep for a little bit. Maybe you can rest. But it sounds like you know that you're being a little obedient and it's a little uncomfortable right now. But it sounds like there'd be really beautiful work come from that. Sounds like a lot of people would resonate with that. And it sounds like that journal or the guidebook or whatever you had mentioned, that sounds really, really awesome. That sounds really cool. Even if there's just other art, visual art that's more healing, even if the second part of the album is higher frequencies, even, you know, there's so many ways just after this song that's really intense, we just have 2 minutes of this frequency. Just stay with me for a second. There's so many ways to call in both at the same time. And I think you can tap into that a little more. And it sounds like you have it right there. So I don't think you need to step back.
I'd also like to leave with you the fact that storytelling is a technology. And I think that there's, in the common narrative or dominant narratives that we engage with through what we came up with, the stories that we've heard previously, there's a thing called the tyranny of closure. And that is to say that there must be more to a story. But we are forever becoming. So maybe there is no moral to the story. Maybe the bad guys don't get what they deserve. Maybe we're here to witness each other. You know, there's that. And something that I use as an artist is to think of a release as a release. R-E dot lease. It is no longer mine. It's here for you. So I released it by releasing. So there is something that you open yourself up to. Your work is not done once it's out. That's a part of it, you know? Now it's about the sharing and the resonance that you have no idea what the work can do. We have to admit that. We have no idea until we release it. So I encourage you to have the courage.
I also just wanted to add really quickly, maybe there's also a space where you explore this pull to like add this second layer of this healing part. Yeah. Because even you using the word trauma dump, like who told you that? Maybe you're just sharing, right? Maybe it was hard as whatever, right? And that's why maybe somebody at one point was like, that's too much for me. And maybe that's why you feel like it's a trauma dump. Maybe these types of conversations, there's a lot of overgeneralization of how awful and how dramatic and how damaging music can be, may or may not be. These frequencies may be too low, XYZ. So maybe there's also a world where you have a lot of that coming in too. Because you, when you say like you're tired, maybe there's not much more for you to do, right? Maybe that exhaustion is coming from spending time somewhere else that you don't need to be. Maybe it is finished, and there's just a little fear with being as authentic as this sucked really bad. Here's what I have. Enjoy it. That's okay too.
I just wanted to add one thing, if I could speak. Is that therapy school really fucks you up? And just from my personal experience in terms of like making art, there's a lot of shoulds that start entering the picture that, and I don't know if that resonates for you, but I was hearing like maybe there is something that, and so I just want to acknowledge that like, perhaps there's like therapy room or therapy school in the room with you a bit when you're writing. And I wonder if there's a way to kind of like kindly ask it to step outside of the studio for a bit. Yeah.
Well, it's 9 o'clock. Any last questions? Good. Thank you all so much for spending your evening online wherever the camera is, and here. These are really difficult conversations to engage with, and I hope folks found some healing or maybe some tools. Journal, go to a thing and meet people, go to therapy, hydrate, dismantle capitalism, the normal things. I'll say again, join an organization, engage in your own work and in order to make the world better. And thank you all. Thank you so much, Jonny, Beth,